Hi everybody and welcome to Mike's Hidden Histories. I'm here in Foynes, a small town in County Limerick on the banks of the River Shannon here, close to the Shannon estuary, to tell you about the history of this town. It's not really the history of the town, in fact, it is why this small place became Europe's biggest airport prior to World War II. And that's true. It was the European terminal for transatlantic flights on the famous flying boats during the 1930s up to the mid 1940s. It all began with the Montreal Agreement in 1935, and this was an agreement between the United States, Canada, United Kingdom, and the Irish Free State, as this country was known then, which set up Foynes here, determined that Foynes would be the European terminal for incoming flights from transatlantic flights from the continent of America when it happened, and Botwood in Newfoundland would have a similar role also. Now this was an expanse of over 1900 miles, so it was quite a large, for that time, quite a big challenge to be undertaken. But this is what was going to happen over the next few years. So 400 people arrived here in 1936 to set up the terminal building, to set up the telegraphy service, because Morse code was going to be the method of communication between the seaplanes and the terminus here in Foynes, and the same in Botwood on the other side, and also to have a weather forecasting service. So the population of the town almost doubled, in fact, in 1 year. In February 1937 then, the first seaplane belonging to Imperial Airways in the UK flew from Southampton to here and landed in this estuary. And that was the first test. There were no passengers at this time. And that had a range of 760 miles only, flying at 165 miles per hour. Certainly not enough to cross the Atlantic. That first test flight was in February 1937. So still the challenge was how to get a range to cross the Atlantic, how to get that mileage, to get a capacity to fly across the North Atlantic Ocean. So it was decided that both Imperial Airways and Pan Am in America would strip, in this case, Imperial Airways stripped their S-23 down to the bare minimum to get rid of all the weight. And in America, Pan Am took us across the 3 and stripped it down as well. And on the 5th of July, 1937, the planes took off, one here from Foynes, going westward towards America, for Botwood in Newfoundland, and one from Newfoundland to here. So the plane that left here took just over 15 hours, and the incoming plane landed here safely with 12 and a half hours. And the difference in time, of course, was the prevailing winds was carrying the plane that landed here in Foynes. So you could fly the Atlantic. No passengers yet, and range remained the problem, because the more weight you put on, the more fuel you burnt. How were they going to overcome this problem of being able to lift off with enough fuel? And so 2 experiments in 1939 tried to solve this problem. The first response was the Short Mayo Composite Project. That's what it was called. It was an experiment, and this involved a S-23 seaplane locked onto the back of a much larger seaplane, and this larger seaplane would take off with the smaller plane on its back, and when they were in midair, the small plane would disconnect and continue to fly. Now, because planes consume so much fuel in takeoff, this was saved a considerable amount of fuel. So that first experiment was on the 21st of July 1938, and the plane was able to fly direct to Montreal, considerably further in to Canada than Botwood on the coast of Newfoundland. So this was a big advance. So a mail service was then set up using this method also. Now, a second method that was used was the refueling of the seaplane in midair. So the seaplane took off here from the estuary. It was met out in the Atlantic nearby, not far away, by a fuel tanker plane which took off from the airport, Roynana Airport, which became Shannon Airport. And over a 12-minute period, through a connecting hose, it was able to refuel and replace the lost fuel that was consumed during takeoff. And again, this allowed the service to continue and taken 22 hours to, a little over 22 hours to get to Montreal. Now, this was used now for bringing mail from Southampton to Foynes to Botwood, Montreal and New York, a route, a circuitous route like that, and back again. But still no passengers. And that was the situation till Pan Am got involved in 1939. So Pan Am developed the luxurious Yankee Clipper. And the first Yankee Clipper, operated by Pan Am, landed here in a test flight from America in April 1939. And in June 1939, a service landed again, now bringing mail and cargo. And it wasn't until July 1939 that the first passengers arrived here. 35 passengers and 7 crew here landed in Foynes and proceeded to be welcomed in the terminal building. So this was a great achievement for Foynes and for aviation now. And to give an idea, we think we have luxury air travel. Just listen to what the Yankee Clipper, what was inside the Yankee Clipper. Firstly, every passenger of the 35 passengers had their own sleeping quarters. The passengers had an observation deck. You could get up, walk around, look out at the view as you were passing by. They flew, of course, much lower than jet engines today, much lower, so there was probably much more to see. And the crew weren't forgotten, in fact. They had not just a cockpit, but they had a flight deck, almost like the deck of a ship, where they could walk around inside in the flight deck, the crew. And there were 2 crews. One rested in sleeping quarters. They had their own sleeping quarters, while the other flew the plane, because it was about 22 hours of a flight. Now, they were treated to luxury. There was a dining room on board, 14-seat dining room, and passengers were treated to a 7-course meal prepared by 2 chefs from scratch. So the best of food. It wasn't cheap to fly this. $375 in 1939 was a lot of money. Maybe $650 or return, but it was a lot of money at the time. So the Yankee Clipper was in use here with Pan Am right up till the beginning of World War II in the autumn of 1939. So and they ceased operation then, but not for too long, until 1942, because in that year, 1942, American export airlines, now called American Airlines, began to fly with flying boats also into Foynes. And their chief pilot, Charles Blair, in fact, carried out 405 flights across the Atlantic during the war years. And in fact, he's noted for 2 reasons. One is that he was the first man to fly direct to New York. He found that when he reached landfall at the other side, he had enough fuel to continue on to New York. That was on the 22nd of June 1942, and it took him flying time of 25 hours 42 minutes. So he is renowned for that to this day. In 1945, nearby Shannon Airport, across here in County Clare, opened. Land planes now had advanced and were able to fly the Atlantic. So the short but magnificent era of the flying boats here in Shannon was a great time, a momentous time for this little village or this little town of Foynes. So it's well worth a visit to come to the museum today and learn all about the flying boats and their great era in the 1930s and 1940s in Ireland and America and elsewhere. That's all from Mike's Hidden Histories. More next time.